We got some breaking news here. The economy grew 4.1% in the second quarter. Just getting that number in. It matched expectations from economists and is the best reading since 2014. U.S. markets are getting a big boost on this news. Jonathan Lemire, great news for the country, and the president is sure to capitalize on it.
I'm watching my phone for the tweet that's coming at any time. But this is also the heart of the issue. As much as this, of course, this investigation matters, these stories matter, the tape matter. Right there about the economy, that is going to play more of a role in his re-election chances than anything else. And this is something, if the economy keeps roaring, we certainly have plenty of time for it to slow down. But if that is something that the president is going to wrap his arms around, we expect a full court press here over the weekend into next week about the economy, how the Trump economy is bringing back jobs. We saw it yesterday in the Midwest with that factory plant opening. That's the turf he wants to be on right now, and not all of this stuff.
Well, let's separate the economy from health care and jobs and wages, and they're not the same thing.
But he's not going to.
But I would also say there are Republicans, including some in the administration, who are really worried that some of these trade actions are going to undo.
Well, those two things are tied together. Some of the good economic news is because companies were rushing to spend money before the tariffs came in. It's remarkable to me. The economy is doing well. Those numbers are good. What's remarkable to me is that his poll numbers have not gone up because of this. And if I were sitting in the White House and I looked at the job numbers and the GDP numbers and said, man, I can't get above 42%. That's a big siren for me if I'm in the White House.
This was the case the president was making yesterday in both Iowa and Illinois, that the Trump economy is moving ahead. He even telegraphed that there'd be a good GDP number today.
Well, the president, despite all the scandals around him, has really beat this drum that he is good for the economy, that he could bring back American jobs, that making America great again was really about the economy. I think that if people's jobs and their wages also grow, and that people actually see this personally impacting their lives, then President Trump is well on his way to at least keeping his base happy, at least keeping possibly a growing number of Republicans happy. And I think that the other important thing is that the president wants to talk about this. There's all these things about Russia. There's all these things about immigration and separating families. And yesterday, when all this stuff was going on, President Trump was in the Midwest. He was in Illinois, in Iowa, making the case that he is the president who brought back jobs and who really believes in American steel. So I think that that's the case. I talked to a farmer yesterday for a piece that I was doing about farming and trade, and that person's very angry about the aid package that farmers are getting, but they still feel very good about the economy.
Well, you talk to some of those farmers. They say we don't want bailouts. We want an open and free market around the world. Yeah. So let's just get rid of the tariffs. Again, 4.1% growth in the second quarter. That's the best number since the third quarter of 2014. We've got much more Morning Joe ahead. We're back in 3 minutes.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.